Okay, so we're back, and now we will be discussing our very first topic for this semester, which is all about your homeostasis and your feedback mechanisms. So let's start first by describing or defining what homeostasis really is. So homeostasis here, class, means homeo and stasis. Homeo means the same, and your stasis means standing still. So homeostasis here, class, literally means unchanging, but the term does not really mean an unchanging state. Instead, it indicates a dynamic state of equilibrium or a balance in which internal conditions change and vary. So meaning, class, your homeostasis means that there is a state of internal stability despite of the changes that happens on the external environment in a certain person. So let's just say, for example, there is a change in the temperature in a certain area. So how does or what are the processes in the human body, what are these processes that will happen so that our body can adjust with the sudden change in the temperature? So that is why we have to maintain our internal stability, or what we know as your homeostasis. So homeostasis, class, is the ability of the organism to maintain relatively stable internal conditions in a constantly changing external environment. So homeostasis is the maintenance of your internal stable environment despite of the changes in the external environment, which includes your body temperature, the chemical composition, and the liquids or fluids in the human body. Now, when we think of the fact that our body is made up of trillions of cells in a constant activity, and that remarkably little usually goes wrong with it, you begin to appreciate what a marvelous machine your body is. So, kumbaga, ang ato nga lawas is like a machine or a robot. So, how we maintain our homeostasis depends on a human's or a person's capability to maintain his balance or equilibrium. Now, what happens to a person if there is no homeostasis? Chances are, may masakit siya. Or chances are, there is the presence of an illness or a diseases, or it may lead to death if homeostasis is not being maintained by a certain person. Okay? Now, what are the processes that the body undergoes para ma-maintain niya ang homeostasis? Now, let's have the concept of your feedback mechanisms. So, your feedback mechanism, class, is the way our body process that certain change from the external environment. Let's have first the various components in your feedback mechanism. So first, we have your different components. We have the variable, the receptor, the control center, and your effector. So let's discuss that one by one. Okay. First, let's have your variable. So the variable, class, is the factor or the event being regulated by the human body. So ano ni siya ang mga variable na gina-regulate sa atong nga lawas? Our temperature, our respiratory rate, your blood glucose, ang imong sugar sa lawas. We also have your blood pressure, and of course, the presence of the oxygen and carbon dioxide sa atong lawas. So those are considered as our variables. Now, let's have your receptor. So the receptor is some type of sensor that monitors and responds to the changes called your stimuli by sending your information or input. So your receptor, class, or your receptor sites provide information para i-process na siya sang ato nga brain, or later on what we call as your control center. By the way, your receptors can be felt, or that sensors can be felt by those that are present within our nerves. So it coordinates also with the nervous system. Like for example, the sense of touch, the sense of smell, the sense of sight. Those receptors are present within those parts of our body, or various parts of our body. Next, let's have your control center. So the control center determines the level or the set point at which a variable is to be maintained, analyzes the information it receives, and then determines the appropriate response or a course of action. Okay, so which means, class, that our control center is literally the brain or the nervous system itself. Now, let's have the next, which is your effector. So the effector provides the means for the control center's response or the output to the stimulus. Kung ano bala ang himuon sa atong nga lawas. So that is your effector, or being processed by your effector. Now let's try to discuss the components of your feedback mechanism. Let's just say, for example, temperature. So first, let's have your variable, which is the temperature. Let's just say, for example, we're in a certain location that has a hot temperature. However, due to various changes, for example, your climate change, the weather suddenly turns into a cold one. Okay? Gulpi lang nagtugnaw. So your variable is your temperature. Now, since there is a change in the temperature from hot to cold weather, your receptor, or the receptor or the sensors present in your skin will now determine the presence of the cold weather. Now, from this receptor, it will lead this certain information directly to your control center. But before that, the pathway, class, that undergoes your information from the receptor to your control center is called your afferent pathway. Again, information from the receptor to control center or your brain is called your afferent pathway. Now, this information halin sa panit or from the skin directly to the nerves to be interpreted on your control center or to your brain. That is your afferent pathway. So, since na-interpret na ni control center or ni brain, nagulpi lang nagtugnaw, or there is a sudden change in the temperature, chances are it will order your muscles to have a shivering effect. So what happens if there is shivering effect? There is the utilization of ATP or energy. Therefore, there is heat or heat production. Now, from the brain or your control center to your effector, it will undergo this information or certain information or action to your efferent pathway naman. Okay, information, again class, information from the control center to your effector is called your efferent pathway, or the pathway from your brain to your effector. Okay, so now that the brain has interpreted that there is a cold temperature, it will result to the shivering mechanism of your muscles to produce heat. So that is now your effector. Kay tungo nagtugnaw, i-shiver ka para mag-init ang imulawas. So therefore, there is already the maintenance of homeostasis. Kay tungod nag-init, init ang imong lawas, gulpi lang nagtugnaw, ma-shiver siya kay para mabalik niya ang init. So there is homeostasis, there is stability. It has able to counteract the effect of the external stimuli. Okay, so that is your components of the feedback mechanism. Now, let's have the two types of your feedback mechanisms. Feedback mechanisms, class, can be either negative or positive feedback mechanism. So the result of the response, the feedback to influence the stimulus, either depressing it through negative feedback so that the whole control mechanism is shut off, or enhancing it through your positive feedback so that the reaction continues at an even faster rate. Ano meaning sina? So let's discuss it one by one. First, let's have your negative feedback. So, negative feedback mechanism class results when there is a change in the condition that triggers action that, tandaan, reverses the change. Again, if there is negative feedback, it reverses the change. So, most or the common homeostatic control mechanism is your, negative feedback mechanism. So, anong kakatabo in your negative feedback mechanism? As what I've said earlier, it reverses the change. For example, sa temperature, kay tungod init or tungod tugnaw, balis karon niya ang effect sang tugnaw sa imo lawas. So, there is shivering effect para mag-init ang imo lawas. Due to this shivering effect, there is the heat production which results to the stability or the ability of your body to adjust on that kind of temperature. Okay? It counteracts or it reverses the effect. That is an example of your negative feedback mechanism. Now, let's try to have this one. Stimulus. For example, the temperature change or the cold weather, for example, leads to your vasoconstriction. Maghambal kita class, vasoconstriction. Our blood vessels try to constrict. Okay, nagakipot siya, nagagamay siya. So, during vasoconstriction, nagakipot ang aton nga ugat and which results to increase in the blood pressure. Imagine class, kung ang dugo mo nagalatay siya sa imong nga ugat nga open gid katama, swabe lang, hina ang pressure. Pero kung kiputon mo siya, nagabasbog, nagabusawak ang pag-flow sa atong dugo. There is increase in the blood pressure. Now, since there is vasoconstriction or nagkipot ang imong blood vessels, there will be an interpretation sa imong brain or control center nga kataas ang imo BP. So, anong himuon mo? So, chances are, it will interpret from your blood vessels or from the receptors or your baroreceptors from these blood vessels and now tells your heart to dilate your blood vessel. Hambalo niya po kumbaga ang imong heart, hindi pagpakiputa ang mga ugat nga ara dira, paabrihe kay para hindi ka magtaas ang imong BP. So chances are it will dilate or it will open your blood vessels which results to normalizing your blood pressure. Okay? So again, kay tungod nagtaas ang iya BP, ginsugo ni brain ang heart nga paabrihan ang imong ugat para magnormal ang imong blood flow. Okay, so that is an example of your negative feedback mechanism. So in your negative feedback mechanisms class, it also includes the following. Number 1, temperature. Number 2, heart rate. For example, nagdalagan ka, pila nga dasig ang imong heart rate. Papahuwayi bala mga pila ka minuto kay dugay-dugay mamatama kung na siya normal. Okay, kumbaga it reverses the effect. From dasig, ginapahinay niya. Okay, we also have your blood pressure. We also have your breathing rate. Ang pagginhawa mo, kung nahapo kada, pahuway, dugay-dugay, gabalik sa normal. That is also an example of your negative feedback mechanism. And last, we have your blood levels of glucose, ang imong sugar. For example, kada kakaon, nagtaas ang imong blood sugar, chances are, your brain will order your pancreas to release insulin. Kaya para si insulin, i-regulate ang blood sugar mo, which means manubo naman ang imong sugar. It reverses the change. Okay? So that is your negative feedback mechanism. Now, let's have the other one, which is your positive feedback mechanism. So, mechanisms that result in having the body react to a change by amplifying it. From the word amplifying, it strengthens, it increases that certain change. So these are much rare in the body because they tend to increase the original disturbance or the stimulus and to push the variable farther from its original value. So these mechanisms control infrequent events that occur explosively and do not require continuous adjustments. Anong ginabuot silingon sina? Or what does it mean? Di ba, when we go back to your negative feedback mechanism, it reverses the effect. When there is an increase, it will process so that it will have the decrease of that certain stimulus. For example, your heart rate, ginapanubo niya. Now, in your positive feedback mechanism class, anong ginahimo niya? There is the amplifying effect. It increases the effect. Okay? So, ang change nga nabatsyagan sa imong lawas, sige-sige ho niya pagid para magbalik ka sa imong homeostatic state. Okay? Your positive feedback mechanism class only has two best examples. Okay? Again, it only has two best examples. Number one is your blood clotting, and number two, we also have your childbirth or the labor. Okay? So, paano na siya, sir, ang labor kag ang blood clotting nangin positive feedback mechanism? So, tandaan ta, class, ha? Again, positive feedback increases the effect. Okay? Now, let's have this one. This one is about your childbirth or your delivery or labor. Now, let's just say that there is a pregnant mother. Manugbata na siya, 9 months na siya. Remember that there are duwa ka tao sa isa kalawas, the mother and the child. So, hindi na siya pwede nga tungod nagbusong na si mother, iluad niya lang na nga para magamay pagid ang bata. Hindi na siya pwede. Hindi pag i-reverse. So, paano or how would the mother go back to the homeostatic state? So, of course, she needs to expel the baby out of her uterus. Now, in your positive feedback mechanism, again, it increases or amplifies the effect. So, chances are, in your delivery, the control center or the brain will, kumbaga, send signals or chemical hormones called your oxytocin para i-compress, pag i-compress ang uterus ni mother. So, chances are, there will be hastening of the labor. Ginapadasig niya magpagwa ang bata. So, ano himuon ng lawas ng mother so that the mother could go back to the homeostatic state. Pataaso niya pataaso ng oxytocin, pasakiton niya nga pasikiton kay para magwa ang bata. Para si mother makabalik sa homeostatic state. Okay? So, that is an example of your positive feedback mechanism in relation to your childbirth. Okay? Oh, labay lang ang storya. Okay. This is also related with this concept. Remember, class, your oxytocin is a hormone in which it helps in the contraction of your uterus. So, ang ginahimo namon, class, or what we do in hospitals before during our delivery room duties is that we try to ask the mother during the labor stage to play or to stimulate her nipples. Okay? So, when the mother stimulates the nipple, chances are, it sends stimulus to the brain para pataason pagid ang production ng oxytocin, causing the uterus to contract pagid. Okay? So, that is an example of your positive feedback mechanism. Sige, yun mo da siya play or stimulate ang nipple, there will be increase in the oxytocin. Okay? And also, class, by the way, oxytocin is one of your happy hormones. So, girls, kung nasubuan, okay, so just kidding. But anyway, that's the reality. Okay, oxytocin is one of the happy hormones also. Okay? Now, let's try to relate the blood clotting. Diba, kung mapilas ka, what happens? It doesn't just goes to close the wound. Kumbaga, wala siya nagagulpi, kumbaga nagakipot na yun. So, what happens if there is a cut or a wound on your hand? For example, chances are, pataason, or there is an increase in your platelet count. So that there will be clotting mechanism. So, sige nga produce ang platelets, there is sudden gush of blood, chances are there is also increase in the platelet clotting, or aggregation. So kung nakita nyo sa pilas, nagano siya, nagakugan-kugan, nagabilog-bilog, kaya nagamala. Because there is an increase in the number of your platelet on that certain area. So again, positive feedback mechanism, there is increase or the amplification or amplifying of your change nga ginabatsyag. Okay? So again, that is your negative and your positive feedback mechanism. Okay. Now let's have your organ systems. So in general, the body is in homeostasis when its needs are being adequately met and it is functioning smoothly. And every organ system plays a role in maintaining the constancy of the internal environment. So adequate blood levels of vital nutrients class must be continuously present, and the heart activity and your blood pressure must be constantly monitored so that the blood is propelled with adequate force to reach all your body tissues. That is why, class, in a human body, it is divided into various organ systems. We have your integumentary, your muscular, your skeletal, so that we will have a specific areas or regions of systems na i-focus natin when there is sudden changes. For example, napilas ang imong patient, for example. So the focus of homeostasis will be on the integumentary system and your circulatory system. Okay, so that is the purpose why we have your organ systems. Now, let's have the last portion of our discussion for homeostasis, which is homeostatic imbalance. So, homeostasis is so important that most disease is regarded as a result of its disturbance, a condition called your homeostatic imbalance. So, ano kakatabo kung may homeostatic imbalance? Of course, kung may ara ikaw masakit, may ara ikaw infirmities, chances are there is homeostatic imbalance. Let's just say, for example, you have diabetes mellitus type 1. For example, we have your diabetes mellitus type 1. Sa type 1 class nga diabetes, wala nagaproduce insulin ang imong lawas. So chances are magkaon kada nga kaon sang food intake, wala may ma-process ang imong blood sugar. There is homeostatic imbalance. So kung pabayaan mo na siya, it may cause further complications of the disease, or chances are pwede ka mapatay. So that is considered as your homeostatic imbalance. Okay? Sige. So that ends our topic for homeostasis or your homeostatic imbalance. Now, let's have the continuation of homeostasis nga topic class on next week. Okay? So next week we will be discussing naman vital signs and the anatomical regions and positions. But for now, after this video presentation, let me get back to you on our live synchronous class. Okay? Bye!